I'm Mel Caraway. I'm on the board of Texas Impact, and I am here with George Marshall. George has just finished a presentation with a group of us, and talking about how the faith community responds to communicating climate crisis. And George, if you could help us understand a little bit better how we in Texas specifically can interpret climate crisis, not just to Texas voters, but also to our legislators and others.
Yeah, well, let's remember climate change is really challenging for people, right? This is not an issue that it's easy for people to engage with. I spent 2 years writing a book on climate change and why it's hard for us psychologically, and that involved spending time in Texas and talking with a load of people down there. And it's nothing unique to Texas. This is hard. One thing to recognize is that there's a silence around this that I'm sure you find in your work, Mel. Like when you talk about this, people just shut the conversation down, and that's very hard. So I think we have to recognize if you care about this stuff, it's going to be challenging, yeah, getting out there. But what I'd say from what I do know about Texas is that there's a very strong sense of identity and pride in the state. There's a very strong sense of it being a special place where people are different and they have their own values. And the one thing that we know from my work all around the world on climate communications is that you start by recognizing, respecting, and validating the source of people's pride. You start, and the big mistake I think that's been made many times of climate change is making it something from outside, of saying you're wrong, you're dirty, you're stupid, and we're right. Of course, people, who's going to listen to that, right? So what you do is you start saying, like in Texas, we're these kinds of people, and we understand this, and and we're proud of who we are. We're proud of our history and our heritage, and this is why we need to be involved with this issue. Yeah?
We're a very diverse state,
sure,
with so many different regions and economies and everything. We are very dependent upon oil and gas, and a lot of people are very defensive about that.
Yeah.
How can we speak to them and help them understand the urgency of this crisis?
Well, we did a large piece of research in Alberta in Canada, which in many ways is similar to Texas.
Yes.
You have a very strong dependency on the oil industry, a particularly dirty and polluting oil industry at that. But also you have otherwise it's ranching and it's agriculture. There's a little bit of tourism there, not dissimilar as economies. And we found that you have to start the conversation there from a position of respect, and that the language which worked best in Alberta was one of recognition and gratitude to the contribution that the oil industry had made to the prosperity of the province. We would say that you would start a conversation, especially with people in the oil industry, from saying, thank you, we're grateful for everything that the oil industry has done, for the prosperity, for the jobs, for the opportunities that it's created. But now we have a problem. But that doesn't mean we have to throw all of that away. It means we can take the skills and the expertise and the knowledge that you have to build something new. And in particular, in Texas is remarkable for being one of the world's leaders in renewable energy as well, which is phenomenal. So you can say, and once again, Texas is showing it can be number one on the new energy frontier. So it can be a positive story about movement with Texas. But again, we know from all of the communication of any group whatsoever, which extends to people of faith, it extends to people of conservatives, it extends to young people, anything. You start by saying you're important, you have an important contribution to make. We recognize and respect and validate that. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And I think that's immediately is a different position from where a lot of environmental conversations are, which is about putting people down.
With the emergence of renewables in Texas, which is the largest in the nation and growing, how do we approach those who are in the oil industry and encourage them to transition to the new economy?
It's very, very hard, isn't it? Because the tendency will be to see renewables as added. Mm-hmm. And of course, again, like Alberta's like, well, that's great. You'll have renewables to meet Texan energy demand, and then you can export all of the rest. I think there has to be a conversation about the long-term sustainability and security of the industry, not environmental sustainability, but economic sustainability. Mm-hmm. I mean, you yourself you can say, well, look, I've just been at a meeting where all of the world's major nations, possibly with the exception of the US, are deciding that they are going to stop using oil within a generation. well, what's that mean for the long-term security and survival of the oil industry here? Yeah? And we also know that the oil industry goes up and down and up and down. It's on this kind of like roller coaster according to what's happening with the world prices and the supply and the demand. This isn't a great place to be. So often the argument for moving out of the oil industry is not just about the environment, and of course the local environmental impacts, which can be major, but it's also about the long-term, having the kind of quality of security in jobs and the economy. Yeah, and yeah.
I think I appreciated in our previous group discussion your emphasis on the earth as a gift.
Yes.
And how we use that, and especially in the faith community as we speak to others and seek to help them understand the urgency of the crisis. The earth is a gift, but we too are a gift, and those gifts work together.
Totally. We need to always, the language of gift is very powerful.
Yes.
We know that from the testing we've done. We need to remember that this is about people. This is not about polar bears. This is not about the environment. This is about people. And as I was saying, if we're going to start from Scripture, let's start with the Scripture also that talks about love and care and protection, because that's the place we need to have the conversation. Yeah?
Yeah.
And about working together. And as the advice I've given very much also, if we're dealing with challenging audiences of people who are skeptical about the science, let's start with a conversation about how we can care for, protect, and love each other under circumstances of changing climate. Because we can see that, you know that's happening. You know that's happening, it's happening in Texas, it's all around the world. So the starting of the conversation would be saying, the weather's changing, let's help and care for and nurture each other through this change. And at least then you've got a positive conversation. Right?